a microphone to speak to them. Can you guys hear me in the back okay? All right. Let's wait for this.
It's not working.
I'll hold it here anyway.
What happened? Why doesn't this go on? Is there a button you're supposed to press? Is that it?
Play up on top.
Play? I don't see that. You see that?
Right on the top.
I'm sorry. I must be. Oh, play. Does that do it? Oh, thank you.
You got it?
Yes, thank you.
There we go.
I'm a Mac guy, so I don't know how to use it.
Oh.
Professor,
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much. I'm very flattered that so many of you have decided to brave the torrential rains tonight to come out and hear a talk about something that has really just started to evolve. This is something new. This isn't something that's been around for a very long time. It's really only became effective last May, and a lot of us in the legal and financial communities are trying to wrap our brains around this and figure out, is this something is this going to be the next big deal, or is this just a flash in the pan that may be gone in 3 to 5 years? We don't really know yet. My personal prediction is that this is going to be a big deal. I think this is the way that a lot of early stage companies are going to be getting their funding, for in the next 5, 10, 15 years. There may be a rough patch getting started, but sooner or later, this is how your children and grandchildren will be funding their startups and hopefully paying off their college bills in time. But first of all, let me just get one thing out of the way. I know there are some of you guys who are thinking this, and I like to be very open with my audiences, but let's just get this out of the way. The last time any of you saw anything this big and this purple, it was Barney. Okay? I tend to wear this color a lot. And everybody always says, does anyone ever tell you look like Barney? I don't know. Anyway, so, crowdfunding. Okay, let's just get started. Let's just launch it. By the way, the term equity crowdfunding is what we lawyers call it. In the popular press, you might hear this referred to as crowdfund investing or crowdfunded investing. The technical term for it is equity crowdfunding. It's the same basic thing. Okay, let's see. Let's do that.
Does it work?
Oh, I don't know. I may have broken it. I dropped it. Let's see. Is that forward is where?
Let's see.
There we go.
So you got to press the bottom.
The bottom button.
And the top button goes back.
Top button goes back.
Sorry, middle button goes back. Top button is the laser. So
that must be the laser. Okay, good. All right, first of all. Okay, now you guys believe I'm a lawyer? Okay. We always tell you what we're not going to tell you before we tell you what we're going to do. Obviously, any views that I express, this is entirely my own. I'm not employed by Fairfield U. I'm not employed by IACT. So if you hear anything in this program that sounds like advice and you take it and it doesn't work and your crowdfunded campaign fails and you lose all your money and you file for bankruptcy and your spouse divorces you and your dog pees on your leg and you end up living in a diaper box under the Brooklyn Bridge, you can't really sue Fairfield U or IACT. Frankly, you can't sue me. I'm a lawyer. I don't live in your state, so yeah, there you go. But secondly, and I know some of you guys have very specific questions about legal stuff. To the extent that you do, I'll certainly try to answer them at the end of this program. But always keep in mind, there's a very big difference between saying this is what the law is and this is what you should do. The first is information. The second is advice. And I don't give advice normally without being paid for it. Also, too, you really can't rely on anything I say here as one-on-one advice. For that, I'd have to get to know you a lot better, understand your situation, and tailor this stuff to your specific situation. Maybe charge a little money for it, too. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning. What is crowdfunding? Okay, when you're talking about crowdfunding, you're talking about raising money from the masses, from the mass of humanity, from the common pool of humanity, the hoi polloi. People who are not in any way, subdivided or whatever. You're raising money from the public is what you're doing. Believe it or not, the very first known crowdfunded project in this country dates back to 1885, and it was the base of the Statue of Liberty, which a lot of people don't know. The statue, of course, came from France, but the base of the statue, the stone pillar upon which it rests, was supposed to be built by the city of New York. That was the original deal. And the city of New York ran out of money in the early 1880s. It went through, New York, the country went through one of its frequent panics, as they used to call recessions back in those days, and the city couldn't meet its obligations. So the New York Herald, a newspaper, decided this was a shame. This was a tragedy. This was the honor of the city of New York and the United States was at stake. So they took out a full-page ad on the back of the New York Herald asking subscribers to put up money to fund the base of the Statue of Liberty, and they did. They raised $2.5 million, which in 1885 was probably close to $100 million today. From their subscribers and from citizens who put up their pennies, and that's how the base of the Statue of Liberty got built. One of the very first crowdfunding campaigns. A lot of people don't know that. Okay, up until recently, so fast forward now to the early 2000s. With the advent of the internet, we started to see a couple of websites, most famously Kickstarter.com, which I think most of you know about, Indiegogo, there's a couple of others, for what we call project crowdfunding. Generally speaking, these sites basically enable people to raise money not for a company, not for a business, because the securities laws didn't allow that. But you could raise money for an invention. So, for example, I think we had somebody here the last meeting 3 years ago who had come up with some kind of a kitchen utensil, a fancy type of spork, that you use for your salads and stuff like that. And he was actually able to raise a small amount of money via Kickstarter to get his patent on that, which I thought was very, very interesting. I was hoping he'd show up tonight because I'd like to hear how that all played out for him. So somebody here in the group has done this before. At least one person has that I know of. A book or other creative project. Let's say, for example, I want to write my next book, and I want to take some time off to write it, but I don't want my wife to have to support me for 6 months because, frankly, she'll divorce me if I do that. So I go online, I say, hi, I'm Cliff Ennico, world-famous small business author. I want to take 6 months off to write my next book, and I want you guys to basically fund the time off so I can write this thing. That's another thing I could do. Believe it or not, a surgical procedure that is not covered by insurance. A lot of couples use crowdfunding as a way to raise money for in vitro fertilization and other insemination and procreative type stuff, which is not normally covered by insurance. The best one, I actually saw one of these a couple of years ago on Kickstarter. It was actually quite cute. A couple was trying to raise money for in vitro, and the deal was that if they raised the amount of money and they did actually conceive a baby, the investors would get to name the baby. That was the cute part of it. They would actually publish a list of names, boys and girls' name, and the investors would basically vote and would basically name the kid, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know whatever happened to that campaign, by the way. They probably didn't raise the money that they wanted because I didn't see any kind of a follow-up on that.
This type of thing, isn't that more a charitable type?
Is that more of a charitable type thing? We'll talk about that more in a minute, Moses, if that's okay, because you're right. This is not about venture capital and raising money for companies. This is raising money for a project of some kind. That's what traditional crowdfunding on Kickstarter has been all about. Basically what you do is you launch a campaign on a crowdfunding portal. There's a time limit usually, there's a dollar limit, and then you promote it aggressively on your social media and in an effort to try to raise, I call them investors. They're really not investors. They're contributors, I think is a better word, to be honest with you.
They're backers.
What's that?
They call them backers.
Your backers, yeah, on Kickstarter, exactly. So here are the different types of crowdfunding. In project-found crowdfunding, the investor, the backer, gets something in return eventually. So if I'm an inventor and I'm using Kickstarter to raise money for a product, if the product is, I'm able to get it patented, if I'm able to manufacture a batch, I promise my backers that they will get one of the inventions. They will get this fork. They will get whatever it is, when that's available. In gift crowdfunding, which is more the stuff, the in vitro fertilization, that kind of stuff, the investor gets a warm, fuzzy feeling and maybe a tax deduction. As Moses points out, and quite rightly, a lot of nonprofits, a lot of charities use gift crowdfunding, and the backers don't get anything back except a tax deduction if the campaigner is a 501c3. That's the big thing. If you are not a registered 501c3 charity, you cannot take tax-deductible donations from anybody, crowdfunded or otherwise. But a lot of charities, a lot of colleges, universities, like to use a crowdfunding campaign. Whenever they do a capital campaign, I know of a university here in Connecticut that is in the process of doing this. I can't mention them by name. They're trying to build a new building, and they're trying to raise the capital through crowdfunding. The Entrepreneurship Foundation, which some of you know, Mike Rohr's organization, has a crowdfunding platform where people can make donations to further the cause of entrepreneurship in Connecticut, that kind of thing. Now, beginning May 16th, here's the new stuff. There is what we call equity crowdfunding or crowdfunding investing, crowdfunded investing, raising money for your business and offering stock or debt in return to your investors. These backers are truly now investors. They are making an investment in your company, and they get stock or debt just as they would if they bought it on Wall Street. Okay, that's the major change. Okay, securities laws were changed in May of last year to allow this, and frankly, I mean, as a lawyer, I get very excited about this because this is the biggest change in securities laws since the 1930s. Is what's happened. Hold on for your questions. I think I'll answer most of your questions in the course of the program, and at the end, if I don't, I'll definitely answer them in the end. I always find when people ask questions in the middle of the program, the answer is always in the next slide. Okay, trust me, I'm a little bit ahead of you on this stuff. Okay, let's talk about raising capital online. Historically, you couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. The way the securities laws work at the federal level and at the state level too is that if you want to sell stock to the public, you must make what's called a public offering or an IPO. You have to put together a prospectus at great cost. You have to register it with the Securities and Exchange Commission in Washington. It has to be approved. It has to be declared effective, is the technical term. And then whenever you solicit investors, you have to give them a copy of the prospectus to each investor when you make your solicitation. That is how a public offering works. And it is the default under the securities laws. You have to do it. If you don't fall within one of several exceptions, you must do a public offering if you are going to sell to the masses. Now, under the SEC rules that have been in effect since the 1930s, you were able to do what is called a private offering, which did not involve going through the public offering process. And there were several sets of rules, we call it Regulation D, as in David, that contain a whole bunch of different exemptions, there's about a half a dozen of them, by which people can make offerings of securities without having to go through the public offering process. Generally, these exceptions involve small dollar amounts. So, for example, I mean, you don't have to memorize all these rule numbers, but Rule 504 is a rule that basically allows you to make offerings of up to $1 million over a rolling 12-month period. Sometimes they're limited to the number of investors that you invest. The idea is you're not offering this stuff to the public. You're only offering them to a select group of people. So, for example, there was a number of rules that allow for offerings to accredited investors. Now, I'll talk about an accredited investor in a minute, but it's not everybody. An accredited investor is a very special type of animal. But here's the big deal. For any and all of these private offering exemptions, you could not use general solicitation or general advertising. Now, what does that mean? It meant that if I wanted to make a private offering without having to go through the public offering process, required by the SEC, I could not stand in front of you and say, hey, I've got a new company. It's called Frugal Fremis Incorporated. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm looking to raise $1 million, and I'm offering 5% of my company for $1 million. I could not do that. That violated the SEC rules. For me to be able to say something like that in public, or go on television or radio, or take out a newspaper ad, if I wanted to do anything like that to promote my offering of securities, I had to do the public offering. There was no exception for this. And I will tell you that having done the Money Hunt show back in the 1990s that Doug was talking about, I am probably the leading authority on this particular point. Because when we started doing Money Hunt, one of the big legal issues that we had, I was not only the co-host of the show, I was also the show's legal counsel, which, by the way, is a dual role I would not recommend to anyone. Okay, being a TV star, the star of the show, and the show's lawyer is a combination that it's not a conflict of interest or anything like that, but it just doesn't work very, very well. We used to have to coach our guests when they came on the show. This was a show about entrepreneurs, just like Shark Tank. We had to coach these guys, say, look, now when it comes to the question, when Miles asks you, how much are you looking for, you cannot say, we're looking to raise $10 million for, selling 50%, because that is a general solicitation. You're telling people on television what your offering is all about, and that violates this SEC rule. And inevitably, virtually every time we tape the show, the guest got so nervous or so rattled on stage that he forgot this. So he would blurt out, we're looking to raise $10 million, and immediately the director said, "Cut, stop, tape." We had to stop everything. Everything came to a screeching halt. The director, the union guys who had it, whenever that happened, they got 10 minutes off under union rules and stuff like that. And I had to drag this poor slob back into the green room and say, "You son of a bitch, we told you, you're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to say it. This is how you must say it." I spent so much time in Washington dealing with junior SEC staffers, trying to get a ruling on what you could and could not say on television about a stock offering because of this general solicitation. It was a pain in the butt. Made my life miserable. Okay? Before we go on, I use the term accredited investor. It's a very important concept in securities law, so let me take a minute out and explain it. An accredited investor, well, probably not you. Let's put it this way. I don't think we have too many accredited investors in this room. If we do, please see me afterwards. I'd like to talk to you. Basically, banks, venture capital firms, other financial institutions, those are accredited investors. Company founders and insiders are considered accredited investors because they know more about the company than anybody else, at least that's the theory. Wealthy individuals, also known as the 1%, people who have a net worth of $1 million or more, with individual income of $200,000 or more in the last 2 years, or with joint income with spouse of $300,000 or more, and a reasonable expectation those numbers will continue. So, for example, if you are a partner in Goldman Sachs, let's say, so you're clearly an accredited investor, okay, and you make an investment in a company, but then 3 months later you lose your job, and it takes you over a year to find something, so there's no income. You are no longer an accredited investor. That's a very important point. An accredited investor, this is not a static thing. What may be an accredited investor today may not be an accredited investor tomorrow, and vice versa. That can change over time. And by the way, why is this concept important? It's important because, when the securities laws were first passed in the 1930s, the people who passed the laws were not idiots. They said, the securities laws at the end of the day are consumer protection laws. These are laws that are designed to make sure that Ma and Pa Kettle do not lose their life savings to an unscrupulous stock promoter who is offering them a slice of the Brooklyn Bridge. That was what these laws are intended for, to protect consumers. Now, the people who passed these laws back in the 1930s realized that not everybody needs these protections. Lloyd Blankfein, the chairman of Goldman Sachs, is one of the world's most sophisticated investors. He has hundreds of people at his beck and call to help him do diligence on investments and stuff like that. He does not need the protection of these laws. So that's what the accredited concept, think of the accredited investor as a person that the securities laws do not care about. That's basically what it is. These are people who can fend for themselves, basically. They don't need the consumer protections of the securities laws. That's why the concept is important. Okay? Now, time to face the strange changes. So from 1930 to 2012, the world I've just described is how it worked. Now, in 2012, we had, by the way, time to face the strange changes. Where does that come from? Who wrote that? Anybody know? Come on, guys, wake up.
Groucho Marx.
What's that?
Groucho Marx.
Groucho Marx, no. Time to face the strange changes. Any boomers here? No baby boomers in this room? David Bowie, people. One of his best hits. Time to face the strange changes. Anyway, I was a big David Bowie fan. Of course, he passed away last year. Some of you guys know that.
I think it's strain, not strange.
Strain?
I think it's space the strain.
Face the strain changes?
Strain.
The train changes?
The strain, not the strange.
Okay, I thought it was strange changes.
Time to face the strain.
The strain changes?
Time
I
to
have
face
no
the
idea
strain.
what that meant. I'll go on the web and I'll check afterwards. I always thought it was time to face the strange changes. Anyway, by the way, there is.
Don't change it. The other one sounds better.
What's that?
The strange one sounds better.
The strange one sounds a hell of a lot better, doesn't it? I think it's right. I'll have to check the web. Forgive me, you may be right, but I'll check the thing.
This one's Trump.
What's that?
This is Trump.
What is Trump?
The
The strange change. Well, we're not going to get into politics here, dude. Okay?
Oh, I don't do politics.
No, really. We're on a university campus. You won't make it off alive. Seriously, it won't happen if you try that. Right. But no, seriously. And by the way, David Bowie actually has a footnote in financial history. Does anybody know what it is? I'll give a book to anyone who can give me the answer. Why is David Bowie's name important in financial circles?
He was the first one to monetize his.
Oh, very good. David Bowie was the first one to monetize royalties from his prior albums. He basically created a security, which are until today called Bowie bonds, that are backed by royalties from his prior records. Come after, I have a signed book for you. You can save $20. But seriously, and they're still called Bowie bonds. Bruce Springsteen and other mostly rock musicians have done these as a way of getting cash against pledging their future royalties from their recordings as collateral. Bowie was the first guy to do it back in the 1980s. So that is his little footnote to financial history. Okay, strange changes. 2012, then President Obama signed the Jumpstart Our Business Startups Act. Note the acronym, by the way, JOBS. What was Congress trying to look for with this act? That was, always, whenever you see an unusual name in a congressional law, always look at the acronym. It'll tell you some things. Okay, it made several major changes to the securities laws. Actually, it made 6 or 7 changes, but there are 3 that we're specifically concerned about tonight. Number 1, it allowed for offerings to accredited investors only using general solicitation and advertising. This is Title II of the Jobs Act, which we'll talk about more in a minute. It allows offerings to the masses via crowdfunding portals like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, that's Title III. And it expanded something called Regulation A, which I'll explain in a minute, Title IV. Those are the 3 major things that the Jobs Act did. It also, for almost all of these offerings, it preempted regulation at the state level. It used to be that if you wanted to get an offering cleared, a private offering cleared, you not only had to go through the SEC rules, but you also had to go through state blue sky laws. And what the Jobs Act does is, in most cases, in all but 1 or 2 cases, it preempts those. If you are doing an offering under Title II, III, or IV, you do not have to deal with the states at all. And a lot of state securities officers were very upset about this. And they've tried to come up with ways to try to get around it. It's one of the big areas of debate in this whole world of crowdfunding. But that was one of the things. The whole idea was, if you're looking to raise $1 million through crowdfunding, you can't really worry about filing documents with 50 state regulators. And that's a common sense thing. So let's talk briefly about Titles 2 and 4, and then we'll talk about Title 3, which is really the thing you're really most interested in. Okay, Title 2 crowdfunding. Title II, now, you can, for the first time, you can offer securities to an unlimited number of accredited investors. Remember, these are the people that the SEC doesn't care about. They can fend for themselves. They're either very rich, or they're very sophisticated, or very knowledgeable. So Doug, for example, is a good example of an accredited investor. Okay, you can offer to an unlimited number of accredited investors an unlimited amount, and you can use general solicitation or advertising methods to reach them. Major development in the law. Okay, you can take out ads in the Wall Street Journal. You can talk on television now. If we were doing Money Hunt again, we could do that. I'm sure that Shark Tank, they do this all the time on that show. You can do that now, as long as you only admit accredited investors. Okay, but here's the catch: whenever the government gives you something with one hand, they take it away with another. Do we disagree on that? In order to do this, every single investor must meet the accredited investor test. Make one mistake and you're toast. You've blown your exemption, and now you have to go through the public offering process, which is extremely onerous. You don't want to do that. Everybody with me on this? To take advantage of Title II, every investor that you take on board, you got to vet those people carefully and make sure. So the Goldman Sachs guy who just lost his job, for example, I wouldn't qualify that person as an accredited investor. He looks good on paper, but he doesn't meet those numbers today. That's why the definition is important. That this thing changes over time, and you got to be very careful. Under the old law, you were allowed to make a few mistakes, but under this rule, you can't. Okay. Title IV. This is Regulation A. Regulation A has been around since 1964. It's kind of a backwater in the securities laws. It hasn't been used a whole heck of a lot. I remember when I was on Wall Street during the 1980s, I believe there were only about a dozen offerings under Regulation A throughout the entire decade of the 1980s. It wasn't used much at all. Basically, Regulation A is a streamlined public offering. Think of it as a public offering light. You had to go through a lot of the stuff that you had to go through with a public offering, but you were allowed to take certain shortcuts. So, for example, instead of filing with the SEC in Washington, you filed with the regional director up in Hartford of the SEC. That kind of stuff. Presumably, they weren't going to give it the same level of scrutiny that the federal SEC in Washington would. That's one thing I remember. But in the Jobs Act, Title IV basically turbocharged Regulation A, and now they call it Regulation A Plus. Basically, what it does is it creates two tiers of offerings. Tier 1 are offerings of up to $20 million in a rolling 12-month period. Tier 2 is offerings up to $50 million in a 12-month period. If you're doing an offering of up to $20 million, a company can elect whether to proceed under Tier 1 or Tier 2. And they have really streamlined this. They've made it a lot easier to do the streamlined public offering under Regulation A. This has transformed the real estate business, the real estate financing business. This is how a lot of condos, office buildings in large cities. This is how a lot of these things are being funded now. A lot of developers, guys like Donald Trump, are taking advantage of this Regulation A plus. The one thing you got to remember about this, if you're going to be involved in it, and we can talk about it afterwards if you're interested. Tier 2 offerings are exempted from state blue sky laws, but Tier 1 offerings are not. And that's a very important thing to go. That's why, if you're going to be doing a Tier 1 offering, it may make sense to qualify under Tier 2 because you don't want to have to deal with all of the state regulations that are involved. And there are ruthless state regulations on real estate developments and real estate syndications. Okay, now let's get to the fun stuff. Okay, this is why you're here. Title III crowdfunding, okay? Crowdfunding portals. Basically what this is doing is taking the friends and family offering to an entirely new level. Most of the times when a company gets started, first the founders put their money in, then there's what we call a friends and family offering. Uncle Irving puts in $50,000, Aunt Joan puts in $20,000, that kind of thing. And then you go to your angel round where you start going and looking for angel investors, the guys that are on Shark Tank, that kind of thing. What Title III does, it takes the friends and family offering to a whole new level. In addition now to raising money from Uncle Irving and Aunt Joan, you now can hit up your social media crowd for money to start your business. That's the big difference here. It's expanded the friends and family to include your social media followers. Okay? What you do under Title III, you're offering shares via specialized gatekeepers called crowdfunding portals. The crowdfunding portal is usually either a broker-dealer or a company that has registered with the SEC specifically as a crowdfunded portal. No regulation at the state level. Issuers can raise up to $1 million over a rolling 12-month period, and you're not just limited to accredited investors. People other than accredited investors can participate as long as they don't invest more than $2,000 or 5% of their net worth or annual income if they make less than $100,000 a year, 10% if the annual income is $100,000 or more, and also they cannot invest more than $100,000 total in crowdfunded offerings. The SEC doesn't care about anything else you do, but they don't want you investing a lot of money. The idea, again, is to make sure that poor people don't go bankrupt investing in these highly speculative startups. That's what's going on here. Now, some of you looking at this are saying to me, people, wait a minute, Cliff. For someone making only $30,000 a year, $2,000 is a hell of a lot of money. And you're right about that. That is one of the criticisms, by the way, that has come out here, that the SEC has been a little too liberal here in allowing poor people to put too much of their money in these things. That's one of the criticisms that was raised when this first came out last May. All right, I haven't had a chance to update this. I've been traveling a lot lately. But as of February 15th, 2017, here's what we now know. 239 issuers have filed Title III offerings with the SEC. 24 firms have registered with the SEC to become portals. AngelList.com and SeedInvest.com. SeedInvest.com is based in New York, by the way. They're one of the few New York-based crowdfunded portals. Most of the crowdfunding portals are based in California or the West Coast. SeedInvest.com is the only one I know of in New York that's getting involved in the Title III space. Kickstarter does not plan to participate, at least not now. I think they will get into this later on. I think what they're probably going to do is they're going to require one of the Title III portals. I think that's what's going to happen. But they're not in the game yet. Indiegogo hasn't yet decided. They may register as a portal later this year. Circle Up Network is not in the game. They don't want to get involved in that. They're focusing strictly now on the Title II offerings, the accredited investor only offerings. They've made that decision. So, who is crowdfunding? Of those 239 issues, leading the pack, beer and liquor. Of the first 30 companies to crowdfund under Title III, 22 were craft breweries around the country. Beer is big in Title III. And that shouldn't shock you a little bit. I think I know why that is, why beer and liquor was such a big thing initially in this. But roughly half the offerings so far have had something to do with the liquor industry, craft breweries, single batch distillers, that kind of stuff. They're the ones who have gotten big into this. Next, entertainment, games, video games, and media projects. When the rules were first passed last May, the very first call that I got from someone asking for help with a crowdfunded offering was an off-Broadway producer of off-Broadway theater shows. This is how a lot of Broadway shows, documentary films, and other media projects are being funded now, is through crowdfunding, which I think is very interesting. Next, small real estate development projects. Obviously, the $1 million cap on investment imposes a big handicap in terms of real estate. It's kind of hard to do a real estate project for less than $1 million. But there are some small, multifamily home developers, small apartment house developers that have tried to take advantage of Title III. Not too many. And last but not least, ta-da, inventors with tangible products, things that you can touch, feel, smell, and taste. We're not talking app developers here. We're talking about people like the guy who invented that sport. Good. Okay. Inventors Association of Connecticut, you guys are in the right place?
Yep.
Okay, just checking on it. All right. So, who will crowdfund? Who's going to take advantage of this Title III? All right. Well, first of all, my prediction is we're not going to see, at least initially, we're not going to see a lot of tech startups doing this. And why is that? Because right now they're advisors, their lawyers, their accountants, their financial people are telling them, don't do this yet. Wait for it to play out. If you launch an offering and it's successful, you're going to have 500 investors, and you're not really ready for that yet at this point. That's number one. Number two, if you do an offering and it is successful, the real venture capitalists are going to be turned off because they don't want to invest in a company that has so many minority investors. So those of you know, if you've ever dealt with venture capitalists before, they don't usually like to invest in companies that have a lot of little onesie-twosies, 1-2% owners floating around. They like to see concentration of ownership in the management of the company that they're investing in. And with 500 investors in a crowdfunded offering, you can't give them that. So the advisors are probably correct. They're telling their clients, don't get involved in this, so they probably won't be. But here's what I think we will see. And so far, the offerings that I've looked at have borne this out. I think I was right about this. This is what I say in my book, and I was right. Concept companies at a very early stage of development that are looking to validate their market and technology. If all you have is an idea, and you don't have any friends and family with deep enough pockets to provide you with your startup capital, crowdfunding may make sense for you. You're not going to ask for a lot of money. You're probably going to only ask for $200,000 at the maximum. You're not going to go all the way up to $1 million because you'll never get it. And what you're looking for here is money to, research the product, do the R&D, file the patent, and do basic market, feasibility testing. That's it. That's what you're looking for. And you might get crowdfunded money for that. Why? Because you're not going to get it from anybody else. Nobody else likes to invest in companies at that seed capital stage. So concept companies, you might be able to get some money from crowdfunding, but you're not going to get a lot. You're not going to get $1 million. You might get 100. You might get 150 or 200,000. Small businesses in the retail and service sector with large followings on social media, and this is happening. As most of you know, or maybe you don't, if you had a retail or service business, it was impossible to get venture capital. You could not tap the equity markets. Take, for example, anybody here know what Fraunces Tavern is? Fraunces Tavern is a restaurant in Lower Manhattan. It's one of the oldest buildings in New York, as a matter of fact. It dates back to the early 1700s, and it's been a tavern. It's been a tavern since the early 1700s. It's the place where George Washington said farewell to his troops at the end of the Revolutionary War. Famous historical place. One of the most expensive restaurants in Manhattan. It's the kind of place you go if you're celebrating a 50th anniversary, if you're going to propose marriage to somebody or something like that. It's the kind of place you go for special occasions. I had dinner there last year. A client and I, we had a celebration where, my dinner was like $250. Okay, I mean it's a very expensive restaurant. Okay, very famous place. Should be able to start. So let's say that Francis Tavern has to expand. Let's say they gotta develop their property, update some of their rooms. They were very badly damaged during the hurricane a couple of years ago because they're right on the water there in Wall Street. They got some serious. They actually have. If you go into the restaurant now, they show you where the high water mark was, where the water came. So they had some damage. What's a restaurant going to do? Even a famous restaurant like Francis Tavern, what are they going to do? They're going to have to go get a mortgage loan from a bank or an SBA loan. That's it. They can't tap the equity markets unless, of course, they have rich backers, rich investors, some billionaire maybe that wants to fund the money. But that's it. That's all they were limited to. Under crowdfunding, under Title III, Francis Tavern. But you know what Francis Tavern does have, though? Francis Tavern has over 50,000 Facebook followers and over 25,000 Twitter followers. What do you think of that? With Title III crowdfunding, if these guys don't want to pay interest on a mortgage loan, they could tap the Title III market and probably get the money that they need to expand. Because let's face it, who wouldn't want to have a piece of Francis Tavern? Wouldn't all of you like the bragging rights of being able to tell your friends at the country club that you own a piece of one of the most historic restaurants in New York? How about Hamilton, the Broadway musical? How many of you would like to have the bragging rights of saying that you own a piece of Hamilton, that you helped finance a successful hit Broadway musical that just swept the Tony Awards last year? How many of you would like to have those bragging rights? I think most of you would, actually. Which brings me to my third category, the Wowie Zowie Company. Now, please don't look that up on Google or Twitter. You're not going to find it. That's just my term for it. Basically, a Wowie Zowie Company is a company that has sex appeal. It has pizzazz. It sticks out from the crowd. You look at it and you go, ooh, I want a piece of that. That looks really cool. That's all a Wowie Zowie Company is. And by the way, when Doug and I were talking about it, you asked about the secret sauce for what makes a Kickstarter campaign. I strongly, humbly suggest that this is the secret sauce. You got to have something that just seduces people and says, wow, and makes them say, wow, I want this. I want to be a piece of this piece of history. The Francis Tavern, the off-Broadway musical, especially if it's one of the old nude ones. I think that would have a lot of possibility. Seriously, people want to be able to tell their friends that they just made an investment in a Broadway show or something like that. But there has to be some pizzazz to it. Okay, who can't crowdfund? There are some people who are prohibited from crowdfunding, from using Title III. Foreign companies cannot. Has to be U.S. except Canada. We always make an exception for Canada. But U.S. has to be U.S. company. Public companies cannot use Title III. Investment companies, we don't allow hedge funds to get involved in these. Companies with a bad SEC record. LLCs, this is actually turning out not to be the case. I predicted that most crowdfunded companies would be corporations, not LLCs. But about roughly a third of the crowdfunded offerings I've seen so far have been LLCs, so I may be wrong about this. The only thing is, though, if you're going to use LLCs, you have to set it up in a very specific way, and I'll talk about that in a minute. S corporations cannot do it. If you have a subchapter S corporation, you cannot do this. Why? Because subchapter S corporations cannot have more than 500 investors. They can only have one class of securities, which is common stock. All those people have to be U.S. citizens or green card holders. In a crowdfunded offering, there is no way that you can monitor all that stuff. So, as S corporations, I think the door is closed to crowdfunding. You have to be either an LLC or a C corp if you're going to be doing a crowdfunded offering. Also, blank check companies that raise money, without any real business plan, where the founders just say, if we raise $50 million, we're going to go out, we're going to look for some acquisitions. It'll be roughly these kind of companies, but we don't have any specific targets in mind. That's a blank check company. You're basically investing in the founder's skill at picking good investments. Okay. We're going to go through this very quickly. Forgive me, Doug, but can you give me a 5-minute warning? I didn't bring my watch tonight. Do you have a
You
time?
got plenty of time.
We do?
Oh,
Okay, great. So I'm going to try to get, I know this is somewhat technical. I'm going to try to get through most of this so we can go on to the fun stuff here. Okay, launching a crowdfunded offering. First thing is to pick the right portal. You need to set the terms of the offering. Most crowdfunded offerings are what we call min-max offerings, minimum maximum, which means we're looking to raise a minimum of 500,000 and a maximum of 200,000. They set a ceiling and a floor on that. You have to prepare your offering documents and your marketing materials. You got to stay on top of the portal's discussion threads. The portals. The one rule about crowdfunding that you always have to that I want you all to come away with tonight. If you are doing a crowdfunded offering, you cannot market or promote it anywhere other than the crowdfunding portal. And I'll say that again. If you are doing a crowdfunded offering, you cannot market or promote the offering anywhere except the portal, with one exception. They do allow a little offering statement, like a tombstone ad, for you to send to all your social media people and stuff like that. But you can't put announcements on your website. You can't send emails to people except you can send an email to somebody saying, hey, we've just launched a crowdfunded offering. Here's the portal. Here's the link. Go look at it. That you can do. But you can't say anything more than that. You can't say, and here are some of the terms. You can't do that. All you can do is tell people to look at the portal. The SEC wants everything to happen on the portal. They want all the discussion to take place on the portal. That's the one thing I want you to come away with. Some of this other stuff you can read in the book, but that's one thing I want you to come away, because it is screwing up a lot of offerings. I'm aware there's already one offering that the SEC is trying to blow apart because the founders did a lot of promotion and stuff off the portal, and they do not want that. Okay, so marketing the crowdfunding offering, the key here is to leverage your social media network. Right now, we do not live in a world in which investors are trolling the SEC records looking for crowdfunded offerings. That's not happening today. They're too busy doing other things. That's not happening today. I think we will get to this world eventually, but we're not there today. The key to a successful crowdfunded offering, and Doug even mentioned this early on before we started talking today, the key to a successful crowdfunded offering is to leverage your social media followers. If you have lots of social media followers, you will probably have a successful crowdfunded offering. Those are the people who already know you, they've already bought into you, they've liked you on Facebook, they followed you on Twitter, and these are the people who are more likely than anybody else to invest. Sooner or later, we will end up in a world in which total strangers will look and say, oh wow, Cliff's Brewery, that's a really cool thing, I want to know more about that. But right now, the people who are likeliest to invest are your social media followers. If all you have are 2 Twitter followers, I would say stay away from crowdfunding for a bit, because you don't really have the base. I actually, believe it or not, had a record on Twitter until about a year and a half ago. And they actually called me about it. I didn't know whether to be flattered or not. I had opened a Twitter account back in 2012 or something when the site was first getting popular. And they sent me an email about 2 years ago saying, would you please start tweeting? You have 80,000 followers on your Twitter account. And I had never posted a single tweet. Can you imagine that? I had 80,000 people waiting to hear from me. Isn't that something? I kind of picture them as sort of one of those, desert tribes lost in the desert, looking for a sign from God. That's kind of how I picture them. 80,000. Why would you follow someone who's not tweeting? I don't get that. But they were. I had 80,000 followers. It must be a record. I don't know. Anyway, you have to leverage. You can only send notice. There's a specified notice by email that direct investors to your portal. The notice, the SEC actually gives you the script for this. You can't choose it. It has to look a certain way. Basically, what it says is, hey, world, we're doing this crowdfunded offering. Here's the link to the portal. Go there. And everything else has to happen on the portal. On the portal, you can do whatever the hell you want. You can say anything. You can post all kinds of materials. But outside the portal, you can't say anything. All you can do is direct people to the portal. You can post the notice, the legal notice, on your website and social media page, what I call the tombstone ad. That you can do, but that's all you can do. You can't have a separate section saying, hey, here's what's happening in our crowdfunded offering this week. You can't do that. You can do it on the portal, but you can't do it on your website. You can communicate with investors only through the portal. The portal is required by law to have discussion threads where the company founders and the investors can communicate back and forth, and those threads are visible to all investors. Nobody has priority information. No one has special secret information. Everything is posted on the portal. It's all public. That's the idea. They want everybody to see everything in real time. Okay. So let's say you've launched your offering. You've done your marketing well. You didn't screw up. Wrapping up. What happens if the minimum amount is not raised? You have to give the money back. If you get to the end, remember you have to set a time frame here. I'm looking to raise between $50,000 and $200,000 within 6 months. If at the end of 6 months you've only raised 30, but you have raised say 10 or 15, some people have thrown some money your way, you must give them, the portal must give them their money back. You have to fold your 10. What if you hit the maximum too quickly? You can amend your offering to raise more money. You can do that. So let's say for example you hit you hit a gold rush. You say, okay, we're going to try to raise $250,000 in 6 months, and you get your $250,000 in 10 days. You got a wowie zowie company that's just going crazy here. Okay, you can amend the offering to raise an additional $750,000. Remember, you can't raise more than $1 million. Okay, under Title III, but you have to amend all your disclosure documents that are on the portal. You got to explain what you're going to do with all that new money. And maybe the investors, don't want that. You can't just say, hey, I'll take your money because we goofed. Hey, you suckers are out there, we'll take your $1 million. No, you can't do that. Okay? You can say, you have to give them a reason. We'll say, well, now that we see we're so successful, in addition to patenting and doing our market research, we'll be able to do X, Y, and Z with this additional money. And if the investors buy that, they'll sign on board. Okay? How do you get your money? The portal handles everything. The portal handles the cash. The portal also gives the investors their securities, so you don't have to be involved in that. The one thing is, you are required to appoint a stock transfer agent, which is something most startup companies never have to deal with. The portal will usually handle that with you. They usually have a relationship with a bank who will act as your stock transfer agent, but you got to have this. Right now, one of the biggest stumbling blocks to crowdfunding is that there's no exchange where people can trade crowdfunded securities. That doesn't exist as yet. The investors have to hold it for 1 year, their stock, but after that they can do whatever they want to it, but there's no market yet established for that. In fact, those of you who really want to be a billionaire, before I finish this talk, I want to give you an idea that I guarantee will make you a billionaire. How you like that? That's not for a lawyer teaching you how to make money. Now, Bob, now you're awake. I just woke him up. I tried to wake this guy for the last half an hour. Now I woke him up. You can be a billionaire. Yep, now I'm listening. Yeah, Bob, we're all buddies. Don't worry about that.
I had a question.
Okay.
If you raise your limit,
Yes.
you don't make that, you got to give the other stuff back then?
That's correct. If you don't make your limit, you have to give the money back. Whatever people have put in has to go
That'll get
back
you, right?
without
If you're
interest, by the
greedy.
way. What's that?
That'll get you if you get too greedy.
Yeah, that will. Yeah, it really, setting the right amount is an art. It is absolutely an art. That's why a lot of the offerings are what we call min-max. You put a floor and you put a ceiling. You put the floor low enough that you think you'll get it, and you put the maximum high enough that you can also do staged offerings too, like the one for Mystery Science Theater, where as you reach each $250,000, a certain number of things happen. You can do that. You can set like milestones on it, and as each milestone is reached, that part of the offering ends. You can do that. They
Those
do
are
allow that.
stretch goals.
What's that?
They call them stretch goals for Kickstarter.
Yeah, stretch goals.
Stretch goals.
Stretch goals.
Goals. G-O.
Stretch goals. Thank you.
Goals.
Now, I'm having trouble hearing in this room tonight. I still don't know what we were talking about with Bowie before, but that's all right. We'll figure this out. Okay. After the offering is over, up to $1 million, you don't need audited or certified financials. That's one of the other beautiful things. If you're doing an offering of under Title III, you do not need audited financials with one little loophole. There is a little gotcha here. Let's say you only get this. How can I say this? Let's say you go and we're looking to raise $800,000 for whatever. Okay, you do not need an audited financial for that. But let's say you decide to raise $400,000, and then midway through you realize you got a wowie zowie company. The investors are hungry. You've already hit your maximum, and you go back and amend your documents to raise another $400,000. For that second offering, you must have audited financials. That is a little loophole, little gotcha. in the Title III regulations. And by the way, it was not in the original proposal. It was something the SEC added at the last minute. The idea is if you're raising up to $1 million, you don't need, in one offering, you don't have to do audited financials. But if you do it in stages, if you do less than 500 and then you go over 500, that second offering has to have audited financials. They won't let you get away with the CEO just saying everything's okay, everything's cool. And that can be very expensive, by the way. Those of you who've ever had financial statements audited, the accountants usually charge about $10,000, $15,000 for that. That's a very big expense. So you want to try to avoid, when structuring your offering, keep in mind the rules regarding auditing financials. Hang on a second. Well, let me finish the slides and I'll answer any questions you have. Okay? Okay. But let's say if your offering is successful, you must file an annual report with the SEC and the portal, and you now have to manage your crowd. Now you've got 500 investors. You are now the investor relations person for your company. In addition to getting the company off the ground, developing the product, marketing it, launching it, looking for other money, you've got to make all these people happy. And you know what? They're pains in the ass. They're going to email you every day, if not every hour. How's it coming? How's it coming? How's it coming? Where's my money? Where's my money? Where's the return? Where's the product? Where's this? Where's that? They're going to be all over the place. And you can't ignore those people. You can't blow them off. Those are your investors now. They're stockholders. They own 0.000000389% of your company. And you must listen to these people. Okay? That's the problem. And they're pains in the butt. You got to watch out for the time vampire. That's the person who, is emailing you constantly. They think, whatever. They want to know everything. They're sending you 5 emails a day. The Mata Hari, remember who Mata Hari was? She was a famous spy during World War I. She was I think a German spy, or was she an Allied spy? I don't remember. I can't remember which side she was on, but she was a spy. She got shot. Mata Hari, let's face it, you got all these people out there. How do you know that one of them isn't your competitor? How do you know that your competitor hasn't put a plant in there? Their sister, the CEO's sister-in-law has put some money in your company. You don't. Unless you're very good and can ferret that out of the list of investors, you don't know that. So there could be Mata Haris there that are looking for information that's not public and all that kind of stuff. And the know-it-alls, these are the people that are telling you how to run your company. I tend to find, by the way, that know-it-alls almost always tend to have a Y chromosome, and they are usually over 50 years old, by the way.
Did they have
You're supposed to laugh at some of these
Did
jokes.
they have it before they were 50?
It can happen before they're 50. Look, you have to understand. This is something that most of you, especially you younger folks in the back, you really want to appreciate this. But you will eventually. There comes a point in your life, especially if you have a Y chromosome, if you're a male, okay, there comes a point in your life in which the biggest pleasure in life that you get is to collar some poor young person and bore the living crap out of them for 2 or 3 hours until they can't take anymore. It's one of the biggest joys in life when you get to be a certain age, okay? And a lot of these people are probably going to be investing in crowdfunding companies, okay? So now listen here, young man, that's a know-it-all, okay? That's what a know-it-all is. By the way, know-it-alls and time vampires very often inhabit the same body. Okay, I will warn you about that. These are some characters in the crowd. I actually have a chapter in my book called Faces in the Crowd. This is all this is. You have to learn how to manage your crowd. Okay? Now, here's a development that's been happening. I'm seeing this now more and more. As long as you stay within the crowdfunded universe, titles 2, 3, and 4, you can mix and match these offerings. You can stack them to a certain extent. There's no what the SEC calls integration of these offerings. So a pattern that I'm seeing in some of these offerings is what I call the upstairs-downstairs offering. An upstairs-downstairs offering is where you do 2 tiers. You do a Title II offering to accredited investors. Usually it's preferred stock or LLC membership interest with preferred distribution, sometimes convertible debt. You do a Title II offering to accredited investors, the rich people, and then at the same time, you do a Title III offering, usually of non-voting common stock, to the hoi polloi, your employees, your customers, the people who can't afford to put the big lumps of money in at the Title II offering. And you can do that. We call it an upstairs-downstairs offering. I had the privilege a number of years ago of meeting Pierre Omidyar, who was the founder of eBay. Some of you know. And he did a panel once I want to say about 10 years ago, and they asked him, What was your biggest frustration in starting eBay? What was the biggest thing? If you had to do one thing differently, Pierre, what was it? And I'll never forget his answer. He knew it right away. He said, my biggest frustration was when we went public, when eBay went public in 1998, I wanted to create a special tranche of securities for our sellers, for the people who sell stuff on eBay, because these are the people, these are our customers, these are the people who make our revenue. We don't have product of our own. We generate 100% of our revenue from the stuff that these people are selling on eBay, and I wanted them to participate in the IPO. And the investment bankers totally shut me down on that. They said, no, we can't do it that way. That's too difficult. There's too many of them. They don't know what they're doing. We're going to have to make special disclosures, yada, yada, yada. And of course, I wanted eBay to go public. My shareholders wanted me to go public, so I had to back down. But I've regretted it to this day. My biggest regret to this day, Pierre said, is that I wasn't able to bring our sellers on board and give them a piece of what everybody else was getting. Well, with this, he could have done that. He could have done an upstairs, downstairs offering, which would have enabled the sellers to come in at the Title III level. The big investors, the VCs, would still have come in on the Title II offering, but the little people would have come in on Title III, and he would have been able to do that. That's the reason I mentioned that. I only want to mention real estate briefly. This is not a crowd. This is not a real estate crowd. Right now, Titles 2 and 4 of the Jobs Act have transformed the real estate industry. Virtually all new real estate offerings being done in the United States today are being done under mostly Title IV because it preempts the state laws. You don't have to deal with those awful blue sky regulations. There are very, very detailed and complicated state laws regarding real estate syndications, real estate offerings, and Title IV bypasses all of that. So that's been very popular with real estate developers. Title III may be useful for smaller projects, especially those having civic pride, bragging rights. You know, we're refurbishing the old mill or something like that, that kind of thing. You know, some historic landmark. That's the kind of thing that might maybe get a Title III. There are two excellent resources, ifunding.co. By the way, that's not a typo. It's .co. It's not .com. .co. They're a real estate portal, a crowdfunding portal that specializes in real estate. That's all they do. There are, by the way, specialized portals now. We're starting to see portals specialized. There's one portal, for example, that specializes in franchises. You know, franchise restaurants and that kind of stuff, fast food places. There's another one that does debt offerings. I actually was out in Oklahoma City last year, back in August in Oklahoma City. That's how I tend to get it. They always send me to Minneapolis in January and, you know, Las Vegas in July. That's where I go. That's where they send me. But seriously, I actually met a young man from one of the Native American tribes out there who was trying to create a crowdfunding portal for businesses that are set up by the reservation people, the people that were living on the reservation. He wanted to promote small business within his tribe, and he wanted to set up a crowdfunding portal strictly for people who were from that tribe and who lived on that reservation. So you're starting to see a lot of portals now that are specializing, and they're slicing and dicing and looking for market niches. Okay, we're not going to spend a lot of time about this. I don't want to talk about the portals that much because I give this talk to a lot of accountants and lawyers, so this is important for them. Not as important for you, but the one thing you have to know about the portals, the way the SEC has set this up, the portals have all the liability. All the liability. They are not only responsible for what they do, but they're responsible for what all the companies are doing in their offering. So if a company makes a mistake in their offering documents and doesn't correct it, not only are they liable and the founders are liable, but the portal's liable as well. The portal has a duty to ensure that all the offering statements that appear on the portal are true, correct, and up to date. That is a very heavy burden. No broker-dealer in the United States has that kind of responsibility, but the crowdfunding portals do. That's why the crowdfunded portals tend to be very, very picky and fussy about what they take on, because they've got the liability if things go wrong. And we're going to be seeing some lawsuits, I think, pretty soon regarding that. Okay, if you are thinking about investing in a crowdfunded offering, these are the questions you have to consider. Are you an accredited investor? You know, what are the investment limits that apply to you? If you're an accredited investor, by the way, there are no limits. Those limits that I talked about earlier apply only to people who are not accredited investors. So what are your investment limits? Can you circumvent these by listing on multiple portals? who knows how much you've invested? If I'm a crowdfunding portal, and you approach me and say, "Hi, my name is John Doe, and I want to invest in your company," okay, have you invested more than $100,000 in crowdfunding investments? No. Because here are your limits. How do I know where you've invested before? How do you know? How do I know you're not lying through your teeth? And you're telling me, well, the answer is you get a questionnaire or something like that. But what if what if the investor is lying on the questionnaire? This is a big problem. People can game the system by investing on multiple portals and telling everybody, hey, I'm okay. I'm not anywhere near the $5,000 limit. It's kind of like gambling in multiple casinos or something at the same time. It's exactly the same problem. And they can probably get away with that. If I was a portal, in fact, I think that's the number one issue for portals. If I'm representing a portal, I want them to develop a system for ensuring, and basically, what I've told some portals is what you want to get is a personal guarantee from the investor that all the statements on their questionnaire are true and correct. That way, if they lie to you, you can take their house away from them and go after their bank account. That's what I've actually given that advice to some portals. When can they sell their securities? The answer is after a year. When can they write off their investment as worthless? Well, that depends. The IRS has rules on that, crowdfunding doesn't change that. When can they sue the issuer or portal for fraud? I love that question. All right, we're almost done. Okay, here are some potential speed bumps. Okay, that may prevent crowdfunding from taking off right away. Right now, crowdfunding is not on everybody's lips. Frankly, for some of you, this is probably the first time you've heard about it. It's not something that's on everybody's lips. And there are some roadblocks that are going to have to be overcome for this market to be viable. First of all, the perception that a crowdfunded issuer is not ready for prime time. The advisors that are telling their clients, don't do this, you won't be able to raise real venture capital if you do this crowdfunding thing. That has to be overcome. Right now, and this is the biggest thing, there is currently no aftermarket for crowdfunded securities. After the 1 year period has expired, they are treated as what's called a pink sheet company. A pink sheet company is a company that has gone public, that has done an IPO, but is not listed on any of the stock exchanges. It's not listed on NASDAQ, it's not listed on the New York Stock Exchange or any of the other exchanges. They're kind of floating around in free space. Okay? That's what a pink sheet company is. If anybody here wants to truly be a billionaire, okay, now I've got your attention. Here's a business plan. Come up with an exchange specifically for crowdfunded securities. Create a new stock exchange, electronic. Okay, nowadays there's no physical trading space, there's no trading floor, you don't need real estate anymore for this. Electronic trading is the thing. Develop an electronic trading model algorithm that would apply strictly only to crowdfunded securities and get it approved by the SEC. The SEC has to approve stock exchanges in the United States. Do that, and you will probably be a billionaire in 10, 15, 20 years. I almost guarantee it. That's the big thing that's holding back crowdfunding right now is the lack of an aftermarket. If I hold a crowdfunded security, I can't get rid of it. I can't dump the investment. I can't sell it. I can't make a profit. I got to stick with it. I got to stick with this company. Yes.
It's not legal to do it now. You're waiting for the laws to change.
Well, the investor can sell if they can find a buyer. The problem is finding a buyer. You can't just go to your broker and say, "Here, I've got this 10 shares of Cliff's Brewery I want to sell." It's a public stock. It can be traded legally, but who's going to help you find the buyer? There's no market. That's the problem. It's a market problem, not a legal problem. Okay, you can dispose of the shares legally, but you need help finding a buyer. So solve that problem, and I think there's a lot of money to be made there. I think there really is. The other thing too, lawyers and accountants are having significant malpractice risks with these right now. Securities law is one of the highest malpractice risks. It's like being an obstetric or an obstetrician or gynecologist if you're a doctor. It's like one of the highest malpractice categories. If you are a securities lawyer, you have to carry a basic malpractice policy, but also what's called a securities law rider, which can be as much as $10,000 to $15,000, $20,000 in premiums a year. It's extremely expensive coverage. A lot of attorneys who help work with startup companies do not have a securities law writer because, frankly, they don't need one. Now with crowdfunding, if we're advising a company on a crowdfunded offering, and I polled a couple of insurance companies, they take the position that that is securities law. And an attorney or an accountant that's doing this has to be that's working in this space has to carry the securities law writer. And that's going to be a problem, I think, for a lot of attorneys. You know, an attorney who has a very profitable startup client that wants to do crowdfunding has to decide between keeping his client, you know, losing it perhaps to a bigger attorney that has that coverage and can afford that coverage, or telling them not to do the offering because, you know, they don't want to lose the client. They don't want to, let's put it this way: the attorney has a decision between either losing the client to a bigger attorney who has that coverage, or doing securities law in violation of their malpractice policy and not getting covered if they make a mistake. That's a real hard decision for attorneys and accountants, and a lot of attorneys are not going to make that decision. They're going to say, you know what, let's not do this crowdfunding thing. You know, it's too risky. We don't have enough law yet. We don't really know what the risks are. They'll make up all kinds of cock and bull, you know, stories like that. But the real concern is they don't want to have to go out and buy that additional writer to be able to advise the company. All right. Here are my own predictions about what's going to happen. After initial flurry of portal registrations, the industry is going to fragment, and you'll find specialized niche portals will become the norm. There'll be a few big portals like Seed Invest that will take off, they'll grow big, but eventually they're going to get acquired by somebody. They're either going to get acquired by a Kickstarter or they're going to get acquired by a Merrill Lynch or somebody like that wants to create a crowdfunding portal. You know, they're going to want to limit their liability. The big brokers are going to want to limit their liability by buying a crowdfunding portal. Everybody else is going to be a niche player. Franchises, real estate, that Native American guy in Oklahoma City, that's what you're going to be seeing. Traditional crowdfunding platforms will either acquire or partner with a broker-dealer or stay out of the industry. I really don't know if Kickstarter is going to get into this, to be honest with you. They're doing well enough with the traditional gift and project crowdfunding, so they may not be interested in this. There'll be a dust-settling period of 3 to 5 years with perhaps some case law clarifying the issuers and portals' responsibilities and liabilities. We haven't had a portal screw up yet. When that happens, we'll have some case law and we'll know exactly. One of the big questions, for example, and I've been asked this by several porters, is how far can I go to help my issuers? How far can I go to help my companies? If a company submits an offering document to me and it's not 100% right, can I correct it? I mean, I have to send it back to them, but can I tell them how to do it the right way? Can I help them correct their mistakes without exposing the portal to liability? That is one of the big unanswered questions right now in crowdfunding. Can the rules are very clear. The portal cannot show favorites. They cannot give one offering priority treatment over another. They can't discriminate among offerings. That's very clear in the rules. But the rules are very unclear about what portals can and cannot do to help their issuers do things the right way and comply with the law. And I think that's going to be one of the big legal questions. Can a portal alleviate its liability under the securities laws by helping issuers to do it the right way? That's going to be a big question. I think you're going to see some case law on that in the next couple of years. But here's my bottom line. So why am I talking about all this at such an early stage in the game? Why am I wasting everybody's time with this? The answer is because of the millennial generation. You can't really generalize about a generation. You really can't do that. But I think there's one thing we can say about the millennial generation. We have some representatives here, which is great because they can speak for themselves if they like. But I think there's one thing we can say about the millennial generation. They hate banks and financial institutions and anything that smacks of Wall Street because of the 2008 financial crisis. They saw their parents, they saw their relatives suffer, losing jobs, losing their life savings, losing their deposits because of all of Wall Street's screw-ups. And they are looking for ways to circumvent the traditional Wall Street way of doing business. They want to create a world in which people can interact directly with each other without middlemen and other financial intermediaries. And crowdfunding is one of the ways in which that can happen.
The whole sharing economy.
The sharing economy, exactly. This ties into it very, very nicely. I think this is the way your children and grandchildren are going to be funding their startup companies in the next 5, 10. There's going to be a shakeout period, no question about it. But once that's settled, I really see this as the way that most early stage companies 10 to 15, 20 years from now are going to be doing things. So, mercifully, this is probably the most technical talk that I give, by the way. And it's really very hard to come up with jokes about securities law. So my apologies if this was a little bit more of the straightforward, not the usual Cliff Ennico laugh-a-minute program. But it's a serious topic, and I hope I didn't bore too many people out of their minds. But it is an important thing, and now, rather than bore you any further, I know some of you have questions. Let's take some questions right now. I know you have. Ed, let's start with you.
The 100,000 limit was not per crowdfunding company, it was for all the crowdfunding.
The $100,000 limit, a single investor cannot invest more than $100,000 total at any given time in crowdfunded offerings. They can buy and sell, but they can't go over the 100,000 cap. And by the way, I think that is also true of accredited investors too. That's the one rule that applies to them as well to anybody else. They can't invest more than 100,000 total in crowdfunded investments.
Even in multiple companies.
That is correct. If they can't go over the cap, yes.
You talked about doing it like in stages, like you've got a